Seraphina stood in the freezing mud of her father's pauper grave, believing the lies that he was a traitor and she was a worthless omega destined to scrub floors. But as the rain fell, the mist parted to reveal 20 massive white wolves, legends made flesh. These beasts didn't circle to kill, they circled to protect. Leading them was the Alpha King himself, a god among wolves. He hadn't come for war, but to pay a blood debt owed to her father. That single act of honor would shatter her world and cost the pack that tormented her their lives. The rain in Blackwood Ridge didn't wash things clean, it just made the grime stick harder. Seraphina Laurent stood alone at the edge of the jagged treeline, the hood of her oversized, moth-eaten coat pulled low over her eyes. In her hands, she clutched a singular, wilting white rose she had stolen from the Alpha's garden that morning. It was a petty crime, punishable by a whipping if Alpha Kalen found out, but she didn't care. Today was the day she put Arthur Laurent in the ground. Ashes to ashes, the old human priest muttered, looking at his watch. He clearly didn't want to be here. No one did. To the rest of the Blackwood pack, Arthur was a disgrace, a former warrior who had fallen into the bottle 15 years ago and never crawled out. To Seraphina, he was just Dad, the man who taught her how to stitch wounds and hide her scent, even when his hands shook from withdrawal. Dust to dust, the priest finished, stepping back from the open hole. It was shallow. The gravediggers hadn't bothered to go 6 feet down for a traitor. That'll be $50, girl. Seraphina reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing against the lint. She pulled out a crumpled wad of bills, tips she'd made waitressing at the Rusty Claw, the dive bar on the edge of territory lines. She handed it over without a word. The priest left. The gravediggers left. The rain intensified, turning the mound of dirt beside the hole into a slick mudslide. "Just you and me, Dad," Seraphina whispered, her voice cracking. She stepped forward and dropped the stolen rose onto the cheap pine casket. It looked pathetic against the dark wood. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't buy you a plot in the hero's circle. I'm sorry they didn't play the howl." She grabbed the shovel the diggers had left behind. She wasn't strong. Omegas weren't supposed to be strong, but grief had a way of hardening your muscles. She shoveled the first pile of wet earth. Thud. Then the second. Thud. She was halfway through filling the grave, sweat mixing with the freezing rain on her face, when the birds stopped singing. It happened instantly. The ambient noise of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of the highway vanished. The air pressure dropped so sharply her ears popped. Seraphina froze, gripping the shovel handle. She knew this feeling. Every wolf knew this feeling. It was predator intent. But this wasn't the clumsy aggression of the Blackwood bullies who liked to trip her in the cafeteria. This was ancient, heavy, suffocating. A twig snapped to her left. She spun around, expecting Alpha Kalen or his sadistic son, Corbin, coming to mock her one last time. But the figure emerging from the mist wasn't Kalen. It wasn't even human. It was a wolf. A massive creature, standing nearly 5 feet at the shoulder, with fur as white as blinding snow. It didn't growl. It didn't bare its teeth. It simply watched her with eyes of molten gold. Seraphina's breath hitched. White wolves were myths. They belonged to the Northern Distinct, the Winterborn clan, the royals of the werewolf world. They didn't come to dirty, failing towns like Blackwood. Then another stepped out from behind a tombstone. Then 3 more from the tree line. Seraphina backed up, her boots slipping in the mud until her heels hit her father's headstone. She whipped her head around. They were everywhere. 20 of them. 20 massive, white beasts formed a perfect, silent circle around her and the fresh grave. They sat on their haunches in unison, like soldiers at attention. The steam rising from their fur in the cold rain created a ghostly fog that walled her in. "What do you want?" Seraphina cried out, wielding the shovel like a weapon. "He's dead. There's nothing left to take," the circle parted. A wolf larger than the others, a beast so terrified in its symmetry it looked like a god carved from marble, padded forward. His fur was thick, scarred in places, and he carried an aura of power that forced Seraphina's inner wolf to whimper in submission. She fell to her knees, not by choice, but because gravity seemed to bow to him. This was the Alpha King. There was no mistaking it. He stopped 3 feet from her, sniffing the air. He looked at the shovel. He looked at the half-filled grave. Then he looked at her. And then the impossible happened. The Alpha King lowered his massive head. He didn't lunge. He didn't attack. He placed his muzzle gently on the muddy ground near her boot, a gesture of supreme apology. Behind him, the 19 other wolves threw their heads back. They didn't howl a song of war. They howled the mourning song. The deep, resonant sound vibrated in Seraphina's chest, a sound reserved only for high-ranking warriors who died in glory. They were mourning Arthur Laurent. The howl cut through the town of Blackwood like a siren. Within minutes, engines roared. Tires screeched. The Blackwood packed patrol vehicles, rusted trucks with high beams, tore across the cemetery lawn, destroying the grass. Seraphina didn't move. She couldn't. She was still kneeling in the mud, staring into the golden eyes of the white wolf, who hadn't flinched as the trucks surrounded them. Doors flew open. Alpha Kalen jumped out, a shotgun in one hand, followed by his beater, Elias, and a dozen enforcers. Corbin, Kalen's son, was there too, holding a silver-tipped bat, looking eager for violence. "Get away from her," Kalen roared, though his voice wavered. He aimed the shotgun at the white wolf. "You are trespassing on Blackwood territory. Identify yourself or I'll blow your—" A low, vibrating growl from the white wolf silenced him. It was a sound so deep it rattled the windows of the parked trucks. The white wolf stood up. The air around him shimmered, blurring like heat haze over asphalt. The sound of bones cracking and reshaping filled the silence, a sickening, wet crunch. The fur receded, replaced by pale, scarred skin. The snout shortened, the claws retracted. In seconds, a man stood where the beast had been. He was naked, as all shifters were after the turn, but he carried himself with such lethal arrogance that no one dared to look away. He was tall, corded with muscle that looked like steel wire under skin. His hair was the color of snow, wet and matted against his forehead, and his eyes remained that terrifying, glowing gold. One of the other wolves trotted forward, carrying a long black trench coat in its jaws. The man took it, slipping it on with slow, deliberate movements. He didn't button it. He just stared at Kalen. "Put the gun down, Kalen," the man said. His voice was a rich baritone, smooth but scraping against the nerves like sandpaper. "Before I feed it to you," Kalen's face went pale. He lowered the weapon, his hands shaking. "A king. King Silas. We didn't know," Silas vain. Seraphina gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "The butcher of the north. The wolf who ate the moon." The stories said he had slaughtered his own family to take the throne. He was a monster, and he was standing on her father's grave. Silas ignored Kalen. He turned slowly, pivoting on his heel to face Seraphina. Up close, he was devastatingly handsome, with a sharp jawline and a scar running through his left eyebrow. He crouched down, ignoring the mud ruining his coat, until he was eye level with her. "Seraphina," he said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes," she whispered, shivering. "Please, I didn't steal anything. I just wanted to bury him." Silas reached out. His hand was large, warm, and calloused. He brushed a stray lock of wet hair from her cheek. The touch sent a shockwave of electricity down her spine that made her toes curl. "You have his eyes," Silas murmured, almost to himself. He glanced at the tombstone. Arthur Laurent, 1970-5/20-26. No epitaph. Just dates. Silas's jaw tightened. He stood up and looked at the 20 wolves still holding the perimeter. "Finish it." 4 of the white wolves shifted into human forms, men and women with the same pale hair and military precision. They grabbed shovels from the stunned Blackwood gravediggers. With efficient, respectful speed, they finished filling the grave. They patted the earth down. One of them pulled a polished granite slab from a bag, a heavy, temporary marker engraved with a crest Seraphina didn't recognize. "Here lies a kingmaker." "What is this?" Kalen demanded, stepping forward, regaining a shred of his bravado. Arthur Laurent was a drunk. He owed the pack 3,000 in back taxes when he died. "You can't just waltz in here and honor a traitor." Silas turned to Kalen. The violence in his eyes was so potent that Kalen took a step back. "A traitor," Silas repeated softly. He walked toward the Blackwood Alpha. "You think Arthur was a drunk because he was weak. You think he sat in that bar every night because he liked the taste of cheap whiskey." Silas stopped inches from Kalen's face. "Arthur drank to quiet the ghosts, Kalen. Because 20 years ago, on the border of the Deadlands, he didn't run like the rest of you. He stayed behind. The cemetery went silent. He stayed behind, Sealers continued, his voice rising, carrying over the rain, to hold off a rogue army so a 12-year-old boy could escape. That boy was me. Seraphina's heart hammered against her ribs. Her father who tripped over his own shoelaces. He saved the Alpha King. He took a cursed blade to the gut for me, Sealers said, pointing at the grave. The poison in that blade is what made him sick. It's what gave him the tremors you mocked. It's what killed him slowly for 2 decades. Sealers turned back to Seraphina. His expression softened, the gold in his eyes dimming to a warm amber. I looked for him for years, Sealers told her. But he hid his scent well. He didn't want the debt paid. He didn't want the glory. Sealers extended his hand to her. But the debt stands. The Vane bloodline pays what it owes. Seraphina looked at his hand. It was a lifeline. A way out of the poverty, the abuse, the loneliness. But she was an Omega. She didn't belong in a castle. She didn't belong with kings. I can't, she stammered. I'm just an Omega. I belong here. You are the daughter of the man who saved the crown, Sealers said firmly. You belong where I say you belong. Suddenly, Corbin, Kaelin's son, laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound. Oh, this is rich. You're taking the stray. Good luck, Your Majesty. She's broken. Can't even shift properly. She's defective stock. The air temperature dropped again. Sealers didn't look at Corbin. He just snapped his fingers. 2 of the white wolves lunged. They didn't kill Corbin, but they pinned him to the hood of the truck, their jaws clamped over his shoulders, holding him still. Corbin screamed. Speak of her again, Sealers said, his back to the boy, and I will tear your tongue out through your throat. He looked back at Seraphina, his hands still extended. Come with me, Seraphina. Leave this place. Leave the mud and the small-minded rats. Come north. Seraphina looked at the grave, then at the terrified faces of the pack that had tormented her for years. She looked at Sealers Vane, a monster to the world, but a savior to her father. She placed her small, cold hand in his. Okay, she whispered. Sealers closed his fingers around hers. He didn't pull her up. He lifted her effortlessly, swinging her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. He held her against his chest, the warmth of his body seeping into her frozen bones. Burn the house, Sealers ordered his men over his shoulder as he walked toward a sleek, black SUV that had just pulled up to the cemetery gates. Pack her things. Burn the rest. Blackwood doesn't exist to us anymore. As Sealers carried her away, Seraphina rested her head on his shoulder. She watched over the black wool of his coat as her father's grave disappeared into the mist. She thought she was safe. She didn't know that by taking his hand, she had just walked into the middle of a war that had been waiting for her since birth. And the white wolves weren't just guarding her father. They were guarding the secret in her blood. The journey north was a blur of sterile luxury that Seraphina wasn't equipped to process. From the muddy cemetery to the leather interior of the black SUV, and then onto a private jet that smelled of cedar and expensive scotch, she felt like an imposter in her own life. She sat huddled in the plush cream seat, clutching her dirty coat as if it were a shield. Silas sat across from her. He had shed the wet trench coat, revealing a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin. He didn't speak. He worked on a tablet, his brow furrowed, but every time the plane hit turbulence, his hand would shoot out to steady her knee. The heat of his palm burned through her jeans. "You're staring," Silas said without looking up. Seraphina flinched. "I'm sorry, Alpha." I'll look at the floor," Silas sighed, a sound that rumbled in his chest. He set the tablet down and leaned forward, invading her personal space until all she could smell was rain, pine, and something metallic, like blood on snow. "Stop that," he commanded softly. "You are not a servant. Here, Seraphina. You are my guest. And in the north, guests do not look at the floor. They look their hosts in the eye." She forced her chin up, meeting his golden gaze. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why did you really come? A debt is one thing, but you brought the White Guard. You risked war with the Blackwood Pack. For a drunk's daughter," Silas studied her face, his eyes tracing the curve of her jaw. "Arthur wasn't just a drunk little wolf. He was the only man who knew where the winter key was hidden. And he took that secret to his grave, the winter key, a myth to some. A weapon to others," Silas said vaguely, leaning back. "He protected it. And by extension, he protected you. I suspect he protected you from more than just poverty." Before she could ask what he meant, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Descending into Winterbourne, Your Majesty. Temperature is 10 degrees below zero. Visibility is poor." When they landed on the private strip carved into the side of a glacier, the cold hit Seraphina like a physical blow, or it should have. She stepped onto the tarmac, bracing for the freeze. She saw the breath of the guards misting in the air. She saw frost clinging to the landing gear. But as the wind whipped her hair across her face, she didn't shiver. In fact, she felt awake. The citadel, a fortress of black stone and glass jutting out of the mountain, loomed ahead. It was terrifying and beautiful. As Silas led her through the massive iron doors, the entire household staff was lined up. "Welcome home, alphaking," they chorused. A tall, elegant woman with severe cheekbones and hair like spun silver stepped forward. She wore a dress that cost more than Seraphina's entire life earnings. This was Lady Ravena, the High Council's daughter, and if the tabloids were right, the woman destined to be Silas's mate. Ravena's eyes, a piercing icy blue, swept over Seraphina. She took in the mud-stained boots, the oversized coat, and the terrified posture. Her lip curled. "Silas," Ravena purred, ignoring Seraphina entirely. "You've returned. And you've brought a pet." "I've brought a guest, Ravena," Silas said, his voice dropping an octave. "This is Seraphina Laurent." "Prepare the East Wing," Ravena stiffened. "The East Wing. That is reserved for royal blood." Surely the servants' quarters in the lower levels would be more suitable for an omega. She emphasized the word omega like it was a slur. Silas stopped walking. The air in the grand hall grew heavy. The white wolves behind him, his personal guard, lowered their heads, sensing the shift in their alpha's temper. "Did I ask for your opinion on suitability, Ravena?" Silas asked softly. "No, my king," she replied, bowing her head but keeping her eyes defiant. "But the council will ask." Bringing a stray into the inner sanctum, "It looks weak." "Then let them look," Silas growled. He placed a hand on the small of Seraphina's back, guiding her past the fuming noblewoman. "The iced wing." Now, as they walked away, Seraphina could feel Ravena's glare burning a hole between her shoulder blades. "She hates me," Seraphina whispered. "She hates everyone who isn't me," Silas replied dryly. "Don't worry about Ravena. She barks, but she knows better than to bite what belongs to me. Belongs to me." The phrase echoed in Seraphina's mind as they ascended the marble stairs. She tried to tell herself it was just alpha speak, possessive by nature. But deep down, her inner wolf, usually silent and dormant, gave a tiny, hopeful wag of its tail. 3 days passed in the citadel, and Seraphina was going stir-crazy. Her room in the east wing was larger than the entire trailer she had shared with her father. It had a fireplace that roared on command, a bed with silk sheets, and a balcony overlooking the frozen valley. But the luxury felt like a cage. Every time she tried to clean her room, a maid would rush in and take the broom from her, looking terrified. "Please, Miss Laurent. The king will have our heads if you work." On the 4th night, a dress arrived. It was midnight blue velvet, long-sleeved and modest, but fitted. A note was pinned to it in handwriting that looked like it had been carved with a knife. "Dinner. 7 p.m. Do not be late." As Seraphina bathed and dressed, she looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. The dark circles under her eyes were fading. Her hair, usually a frizzy mess, fell in soft brown waves. But her eyes, her father's eyes, looked haunted. She made her way to the great hall. The table was set for 20, but only 3 people were seated: Silas, Ravena, and an older man with a scar running down his neck, General Cade, the head of the army. Silas stood when she entered. It was a gesture of respect that made General Cade choke on his wine. "You clean up well, girl," Cade grunted, wiping his mouth. "Though you still smell like Blackwood mud." "Cade," Silas warned, pulling out a chair for Seraphina. "It's fine," Seraphina said, sitting down. Her hands were shaking, so she clasped them in her lap. "I know where I come from. Do you?" Ravena asked from across the table. She was cutting a rare steak with surgical precision. "Because rumor has it, your father was a coward who fled the war. A traitor's blood usually runs true." Seraphina gripped the tablecloth. "My father was a hero." "The king said so," Ravena laughed. "The king is generous. He pays his debts, even to the bottom feeders. But don't mistake charity for value, Omega. Once the debt is paid, you'll be back in the mud." "Enough," Silas slammed his hand on the table. The silverware rattled. One more word, Ravna, and you will finish your meal in the dungeons. Ravna fell silent, but her eyes promised retribution. The servers brought the main course, roasted venison. As a server leaned over to fill Seraphina's wine glass, Ravna accidentally kicked the server's shin under the table. The bottle of red wine slipped. It shattered on the edge of the table, sending shards of glass and dark red liquid flying. The wine splashed across Seraphina's chest, soaking the blue velvet. A large shard of glass sliced across her forearm. "Oh, how clumsy," Ravna drawled. Seraphina gasped, clutching her arm. Blood welled up, bright and fast, mixing with the wine. "Get the medic," Silas roared, leaping over the table, ignoring the mess. He grabbed Seraphina's arm, his face pale with worry. "Let me see. I'm fine, really," Seraphina stammered, trying to pull away. The pain was sharp, but strange. It was fading already. Silas pulled her hand away to inspect the wound. The entire room went dead silent. General Cade stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the stone floor. Ravna dropped her fork. On Seraphina's forearm, where a jagged cut had been seconds ago, there was nothing. No blood. No scab. Just smooth, unbroken skin. The blood on her sleeve was real, but the wound had closed instantaneously. An Omega could not heal like that. Even an Alpha couldn't heal that fast. That was ancient healing. That was royal healing. Silas looked up from her arm, his golden eyes wide with shock. He looked at Seraphina, really looked at her, searching for something he had missed. "Who was your mother?" Silas whispered, his voice hoarse. I don't know," Seraphina whispered, terrified by the look in his eyes. "Dad said she died in childbirth." He never spoke of her. General Cade walked around the table, sniffing the air near Seraphina. "The scent blocker," he muttered. "She's wearing a heavy scent blocker." "I thought it was just cheap perfume." "I'm not," Seraphina cried. "I don't wear blockers." "You don't know you are," Silas realized. He reached out and touched the thin silver necklace Seraphina always wore, the one her father had put on her when she was a baby and told her never to take off. "This isn't silver," Silas said, his fingers brushing the metal. "It's ironwood and witch glass. It suppresses the wolf. Take it off," Cade ordered. "No," Seraphina backed away. "Dad said never to take it off." "He said I'd get sick." "Seraphina," Silas said, his voice calm but commanding. He stepped into her space, blocking out the others. "Trust me." "Take it off." She looked into his eyes. The same eyes that had watched her bury her father. The eyes that had promised her safety. With trembling fingers, she reached behind her neck and unclasped the chain. The moment the necklace fell from her skin, the room exploded with power. It wasn't a sound. It was a pressure wave. The windows of the great hall shattered inward. The candles were blown out instantly. Seraphina gasped, falling to her knees. Her body felt like it was on fire. Her bones snapped and reformed, not with pain, but with a rush of ecstasy she had never known. A scent flooded the room, not the sour milk scent of an omega, but something rich and overwhelming. It smelled of ozone, lightning, and night-blooming jasmine. General Cade fell to his knees, his head bowed, unable to withstand the pressure. Ravna was pinned to her chair, gasping for air. Only Silas remained standing, though he had to brace himself against the table. He watched as Seraphina looked up, her eyes no longer brown. They were violet, glowing electric violet, the mark of a lunar supreme. A wolf born once in 1,000 years. A wolf capable of commanding even an alpha king. Impossible, Ravna choked out, blood trickling from her nose due to the pressure. She's a mongrel. Silas walked towards Seraphina, fighting the waves of power rolling off her. He knelt before her, not as a king to a subject, but as a man to a goddess. You aren't a mongrel, Silas whispered, reaching out to touch her glowing cheek. You are the lost heir of the Moonblood line. Seraphina looked at her hands, which were glowing with faint silver light. What is happening to me? You are waking up, Silas said. And the world is about to burn for what it did to you. The shattered windows of the great hall let in the howling wind of the winter-born peaks, but the cold was nothing compared to the chill in the room. Seraphina knelt on the stone floor, her chest heaving. The violet light in her eyes had dimmed to a simmering amethyst, but the air around her still tasted of ozone and ancient magic. Silas stood between her and the door, his body a rigid line of defense. General Cade was on his feet now, looking at Seraphina not with disgust, but with terrified awe. A moonblood, Cade whispered, wiping blood from his ear. They were extinguished during the Great Purge 50 years ago. The council hunted them down to the last infant. How is she here? Arthur, Silas said, his voice low and dangerous. Arthur didn't just save me that day on the border. He saved her. He turned to look at Seraphina. He must have found you in the wreckage of the Moon Temple. He bound your power with ironwood to hide your scent from the council. Seraphina looked at her hands. So my whole life, being weak, being an omega, it was all a lie. It was a cage, Silas corrected gently. To keep the monsters from finding you. The council is here. A guard burst through the broken doors, breathless. High Counselor Veric and the elders. They felt the energy surge. They are demanding entry. Silas's jaw tightened. They didn't waste time. He turned to Ravna, who was pulling herself up from the floor, her face pale but her eyes venomous. You knew, Ravna hissed at Silas. You brought her here to usurp the council. Get out of my sight, Ravna, Silas growled. Before I forget my manners. Ravna smoothed her dress, regaining her icy composure. I'll go. But Veric will not be so easily dismissed. You are harboring a weapon of mass destruction, Silas. The treaty forbids it. She swept out of the room, passing the incoming council members. 5 elders walked in, draped in robes of heavy grey wool embroidered with silver thread. Leading them was Veric, a man whose skin looked like parchment stretched over a skull. He didn't look at Silas. His milky eyes locked instantly onto Seraphina. Abomination, Varric spat. Careful, Varric, Silas stepped forward, his alpha aura flaring to meet the counselor's suppression waves. You are speaking to my guest. Guest, Varric laughed, a dry, rattling sound. She is a moonblood. Her kind can mind control alphas. They can break the packs apart with a whisper. That is why we purged them. She must be executed immediately for the safety of the realm. No, Seraphina scrambled to her feet. The fear was gone, replaced by a sudden hot anger that bubbled in her gut. I haven't done anything. Your existence is the crime, Varric declared. He raised a withered hand. Guards! Seize the girl. If the king resists, he is compromised by her magic and must be detained. The council's elite guards, dressed in black armor, stepped forward, spears leveled. Silas didn't flinch. He didn't shift. He simply unbuttoned his suit jacket and tossed it aside. The first man who touches her dies. It's 20 against 1, Silas, Varric sneered. I like those odds, Silas replied. But before the first spear could be thrown, Seraphina stepped in front of Silas. It was an instinct she didn't know she had. A pull in her gut that told her she was the protector here, not the victim. Stop, she said. She didn't shout. She didn't scream. She simply spoke the word with the full weight of her new lineage. The command hit the room like a physical blow. The council guards froze mid-step, their muscles locking up against their will. Varric clutched his throat, his eyes bulging. Even Silas flinched, his knees buckling slightly before he righted himself. The violet light in Seraphina's eyes flared bright. I said stop, she repeated, her voice echoing as if 3 people were speaking at once. The guards dropped their spears. Glatto! 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 They fell, to their knees, heads bowing until their foreheads touched the cold stone. They couldn't help it. Their wolves recognized a predator far higher on the food chain than an alpha. They recognized a queen. Seraphina looked at Varric, who was gasping for air, unable to speak. My father died in the mud to keep me safe from you, Seraphina said, walking toward the terrified elder. He let the world think he was a drunk. He let me scrub floors and eat scraps. All to keep you from killing me. She stopped inches from Varric. I am not Arthur Lawrence, weak little girl anymore. If you threaten me or the king, I will not need a pack to destroy you. I will do it myself. She released the pressure. Varric collapsed, coughing violently. Get out, Silas ordered, his voice filled with a savage pride. The council scrambled backward, dragging a wheezing Varric with them. As they fled the hall, the message was clear. The war wasn't coming. It was already here. Silas turned to Seraphina. The adrenaline faded, and she swayed, exhausted. He caught her before she hit the ground, pulling her into his chest. You commanded an elder, Silas whispered into her hair. Seraphina, do you have any idea how powerful you are? I'm scared, she admitted, burying her face in his shirt. I don't know how to turn it off. We will figure it out, Sealers promised. But tonight, you sleep in my room. Nowhere else is safe. The citadel was on lockdown. The blizzard outside raged with renewed fury, burying the lower levels in snow. But inside, the tension was hot enough to melt steel. Seraphina sat on the edge of Sealers' massive four-poster bed. The king was in the strategy room with General Cade, planning their defense against the inevitable council retaliation. He had left 2 white wolves, Titus and Rome, guarding her door. She felt safe but restless. Her skin buzzed. Every time she touched a metal object, static electricity sparked blue and violet. She needed to clear her head. "I need water," she told Titus through the door. "We will bring it, my lady," the guard replied instantly. While she waited, she wandered to the bookshelf in Sealers' suite. It was filled with ancient leather-bound tomes. She pulled one down titled Lineage of the First Moon. As she opened it, a folded piece of paper fell out. It was a photograph. Old, sepia-toned. It showed a young Arthur Laurent, handsome, strong, smiling, standing next to a woman with hair like white fire and eyes that Seraphina recognized instantly. They were violet. My mother, she realized, tears pricking her eyes. She wasn't a random human. She was the Moonblood matriarch. Touching, a voice said from the shadows of the room. Seraphina spun around. The balcony doors, which had been locked and bolted, were wide open. The freezing wind whipped the heavy curtains. Ravena stood there. She was dressed in a white tactical suit that blended perfectly with the snow outside. She held a long, thin dagger made of black glass. "How did you get in?" Seraphina demanded, backing up toward the door. "Titus." "Rome, they can't hear you," Ravena said calmly, stepping into the light. "I used a sonic dampener. And the wind is too loud for them to smell me yet." Ravena twirled the dagger. "You know, for a moment in the Great Hall, I was impressed. You commanded Varric. That's no small feat. What do you want, Ravena?" Seraphina's hands began to glow faintly. "I want order," Ravena said, her face twisting into a mask of hate. "Sealers thinks he can rewrite the laws of nature because he's in love with a ghost story. But alphas rule. Omegas serve. And abominations die. I am not an abomination. You are a chaotic variable," Ravena lunged. She was fast, faster than any wolf Seraphina had seen in Blackwood. She closed the distance in a heartbeat. Seraphina threw up her hand, instinctively pushing with her mind. "Stop." But Ravena didn't stop. She stumbled, slowed by the command, but she fought through it. She was an alpha female, trained by the best assassins in the north. She bit her own tongue, using the pain to break Seraphina's mental hold. "Your tricks won't work on a prepared mind," Ravena screamed, slashing the dagger. Seraphina dodged, but not fast enough. The black glass sliced across her ribs. Pain, hot and searing, exploded in her side. But unlike the cut at dinner, this one didn't heal. The wound hissed, turning black. "Obsidian glass dipped in wolfsbane concentrate," Ravena smiled cruelly. "It stops the healing." It rots the wolf from the inside out. Seraphina fell back against the heavy oak desk, clutching her side. Her vision blurred. The violet light in her hands flickered and died. "Silas," she gasped. "He's busy," Ravna mocked, raising the dagger for the killing blow. "And by the time he gets here, you'll be a tragic accident. A suicide, perhaps." Overwhelmed by the pressure, Ravna brought the knife down. "No." Seraphina didn't scream it. She didn't speak it. Her inner wolf, the ancient, terrified beast, roared it. She didn't push Ravna away. She pulled the magic from the room. She drained the heat from the fire, the electricity from the lamps, the static from the air. The room plunged into absolute darkness. Then Seraphina exploded. A shockwave of pure violet energy blasted outward from her body. It caught Ravna mid-swing and threw her across the room like a rag doll. Ravna hit the stone wall with a sickening crunch and slumped to the floor, unconscious. The door to the bedroom splintered inward. Silas was there. He didn't use the handle. He had shattered the solid oak door with his shoulder. He took in the scene instantly: the open balcony, the unconscious Ravna, the black blood on Seraphina's side. Seraphina, he was at her side in a second, catching her as she slid down the desk. He looked at the wound, his eyes turning a murderous, glowing red. "Wolfsbane," he snarled. He bit his own wrist, tearing the vein open. "Drink. Now, Silas." "No," Seraphina murmured, her head lolling. "Drink," he pressed his bleeding wrist to her mouth. "Alpha blood neutralizes the poison. Drink, damn it." She swallowed the metallic, hot liquid. Immediately, the burning in her side began to cool. The black veins receding. Silas pulled her into his lap, rocking her back and forth, his body shaking with a rage that terrified the guards standing in the doorway. "Titus," Silas said. His voice was devoid of humanity. It was the voice of the butcher. "Yes, my king. Take Ravna to the dungeons," Silas ordered, not looking away from Seraphina's pale face. "Do not let her die. If she dies before I get there, I will kill you myself." "And the council, sir?" Titus asked, eyeing the broken window where the blizzard roared. "They will claim this was self-defense. They will spin this." Silas looked up. His eyes were no longer just red. They were black. "Let them spin," Silas whispered. "I am done with politics. I am done with treaties." He stood up, lifting Seraphina into his arms. She buried her face in his neck, inhaling his scent, safety, rage, and love. "Prepare the White Guard," Silas commanded, "and send a message to the Winterborn clans." "What is the message, sire?" Silas walked to the balcony, the wind whipping his coat as he looked out over his frozen kingdom. "Tell them the king is going to war," Silas said. "And tell them the queen is awake. The war for the north didn't start with a horn blast. It started with silence." 3 hours after Ravna's assassination attempt, the blizzard suddenly died. The clouds parted, revealing a massive, blood-red moon hanging low over the jagged peaks of the winterborn territory. Seraphina stood on the ramparts of the citadel, wrapped in a fur-lined cloak that smelled of sealers. Her side still throbbed where the poisoned glass had cut her, but the alpha blood coursing through her veins had knit the flesh back together. She felt different, heavier, like gravity was pulling harder on her than anyone else. Beside her, Sealers checked the ammunition in his silver-plated handgun. He had discarded the suit for tactical armor, black plating over gray fatigues. He looked every inch the god of war the legends claimed he was. "They're here," Sealers said, nodding toward the frozen valley floor below. Emerging from the tree line were thousands of wolves. Not just the council's gray-cloaked enforcers, but warriors from the southern packs, the eastern clans, and even the scrappy fighters from Blackwood. Varric had emptied the coffers to hire every mercenary in the hemisphere. "They outnumber us 50-1, General Cade muttered, looking through his binoculars. "Varric has brought the Sun-Eater cannon. If they set that up on the ridge, they'll level the citadel in one shot. Then we don't let them set it up," Sealers said calmly. He turned to Seraphina. "You stay in the panic room. Titus and Rome have orders to collapse the tunnel if they breach the walls. You survive, Seraphina." "That is an order." Seraphina looked at the sea of enemies below. She saw the banners of the people who had spat on her father. She saw the council that wanted to dissect her. "No," she said. Sealers froze. "Excuse me, I said no." Seraphina turned to him, her violet eyes flashing in the dark. "My father hid in a bottle for 20 years to keep me safe. You almost died tonight to keep me safe. I am done hiding behind men who bleed for me." "Seraphina, you don't know how to fight," Sealers argued, his voice rising. "You are the last Moonblood. If you die, the magic dies. I don't need to know how to fight, Sealers," she whispered, stepping onto the ledge of the rampart. "I'm not a soldier. I'm the queen." Before Sealers could grab her, she jumped. "Seraphina," Sealers screamed, diving after her. But she didn't hit the ground. Midair 50 feet above the frozen earth, her body ignited. The violet light that had flickered in the bedroom now exploded like a supernova. She hovered there, suspended by pure kinetic energy, her hair floating in a halo around her head. The army below halted. Thousands of wolves looked up, shielding their eyes from the blinding radiance. Sealers landed in a crouch below her, immediately shifting into his massive white wolf form, snarling at the front line of the enemy. The 20 white guard wolves flanked him. They were a tiny white speck against a tide of gray and black. Varric rode to the front on a black stallion. He looked small and frail, but his voice was amplified by a spellcaster at his side. "Look at her," Varric shrieked, pointing a crooked finger at the floating figure. "The Witch of the Moon. She will enslave your minds. She will turn your pups against you. Kill her." "Fire the cannon." On the ridge, a massive mechanical device hummed to life. "The Sun-Eater." A beam of concentrated plasma began to charge, aiming directly at Seraphina. "Sealers," Cade yelled from the walls. "Take cover." Sealers didn't move. He planted his paws in the snow, ready to take the blast with his own body. He would die for her. He had made that choice the moment he saw her in the mud. The cannon fired. A beam of searing yellow light tore through the night. Seraphina didn't dodge. She simply raised her hand. Stop. She didn't speak it. She willed it. The beam of plasma hit an invisible wall 10 feet from her palm. It hissed, crackled, and then, impossibly, it shattered. The energy dispersed like water hitting rock, raining down as harmless sparks of glitter over the battlefield. Silence fell over the valley. Absolute, terrified silence. Seraphina lowered herself slowly until her boots touched the snow. She walked through the line of white wolves, past sealers, and stood alone in the no-man's land. "Varric," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it resonated in the chest of every living thing for 5 miles. "You accuse me of enslaving minds. Yet you are the one who hired mercenaries with lies. She is weakening," Varric screamed, panic cracking his voice. "Attack! All units, attack!" A group of 50 berserkers from the Eastern clan charged. They were foaming at the mouth, drugged with combat stimulants. Seraphina looked at them. She felt pity, not fear. "Kneel," she commanded. It wasn't a request. It was a rewriting of reality. The charging wolves slammed into the snow as if gravity had increased tenfold. Bones crunched as they were forced into submission. They slid to a halt at her feet, whining, bellies exposed in the ultimate sign of surrender. Seraphina looked up at the rest of the army. "I do not wish to kill you. I am not your enemy. But I am your queen. And I will not be hunted." She spread her arms. The violet light expanded, washing over the entire valley. It wasn't painful. It felt like a warm bath after a long freeze. It felt like coming home. One by one, the wolves in the enemy army dropped their weapons. They fell to their knees. The Blackwood Pack, the Southern mercenaries, even Varric's personal guard. The instinct to submit to a Moonblood was older than the Council. It was written in their DNA. "No," Varric shrieked, pulling a silver pistol from his robes. "I will not bow to a mongrel." He aimed at Seraphina's heart. Bang! Seraphina didn't blink. Varric gasped, dropping the gun. He looked down at his chest. A single, clean hole had pierced his heart. He fell from his horse, dead before he hit the snow. Behind him, standing on the ridge where the cannon had been, was Sealers, in human form again, smoke curling from the barrel of a sniper rifle he had snatched from a guard. "I told you," Sealers' voice carried across the silent field. "The first man to touch her dies. The war was over. Not with a massacre, but with a kneel." 6 months later, the snow had melted in Blackwood Ridge, replaced by the timid green shoots of spring. The cemetery looked different now. The mud was gone, replaced by paved stone paths and manicured grass. In the center of the hero's circle, a massive monument stood. It wasn't for a king. It was for a father. Arthur Laurent, savior of the North, keeper of the key. Seraphina stood before the grave, tracing the letters with her finger. She wore a simple white dress, but on her finger rested the ring of the winter-born, heavy, ancient, and undeniable. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. "The council is dissolved. The packs are united. No more omegas in the mud. He knows," a deep voice said from behind her. Silas stepped up beside her. He looked different, less burdened. The constant scowl that had defined the butcher of the North had softened. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her flush against him. "The renovation is finished," Silas said, nodding toward the town. "We turned the Rusty Claw Bar into a community center for orphaned pups. They're calling it Arthur's Hall." Seraphina smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "You spend a lot of money for a man who claims to hate charity." "I pay my debts, Seraphina," Silas murmured, kissing the top of her head. "But there is one debt I can never repay." "What's that?" "The one I owe you," he said, turning her to face him. His golden eyes searched hers. "For saving me. Not on the battlefield, but inside. You brought the sun to the winter, little wolf." Seraphina reached up, tangling her fingers in his white hair. "Then I guess you'll just have to spend the rest of your life making it up to me." Silas grinned, a true wolfish grin that made her knees weak. "That," he growled, lifting her into his arms as the sun set over the ridge, "is exactly what I intend to do." As he carried her away, back toward the waiting motorcade, the wind rustled through the trees. To anyone else, it was just wind. But to Seraphina, it sounded like a howl. A howl of 20 white wolves, singing a song not of mourning, but of victory. The Omega was gone. Long live the Queen. And that, my friends, is the legend of Seraphina and the Alpha King. From a pauper's grave to the throne of the North, she proved that true power isn't about claws or fangs. It's about the spirit that refuses to break. I have to ask you guys a question. Do you think Seraphina was right to spare the army, or should she have taken revenge on the people who tormented her? Let me know your theory in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a saga. I'll see you in the next video. Stay wild.